we've talked about the rise of these totalitarian leaders. It's going to eventually lead to World War II. Now, World War II, if you look back at history, has been brewing since the end of World War I, when the Treaty of Versailles severely punished Germany with the War Guilt Clause, paying reparations, hurting their national pride, and hurting their economy and their military production for years to come. So I'm going to walk you through the causes of World War II, a few of the major events and things that happened, along with the conclusion of it today. So World War II is going to break out in 1939, last until 1945, and we'll talk about the major players that are going to be involved. So here's kind of a timeline of Hitler kind of coming into power. So he's going to be made chancellor by Hindenburg, who was the German president at the time in 1933. Also in 1933 is when Germany leaves the League of Nations. Remember, the League of Nations was that peacekeeping organization that was created after World War I, where countries would talk diplomatically about their problems instead of going to war about it. But the League of Nations was super weak, had no military to enforce its decisions, and could do nothing from stopping countries like Germany from just saying, we disagree, goodbye, we're leaving. In 1935, Hitler violates the Treaty of Versailles by starting to build up his military, and no one does anything about it. In 1935, Mussolini from Italy invades Ethiopia. Remember, Italy was upset from World War I too, because even though they helped out the Allies, they were not happy that they were basically left out of territory additions afterwards. So they're going to invade Ethiopia to try and take land for themselves. Again, no one does anything. In 1936, you can see that Hitler takes the Rhineland, and you can see that that's basically a territory between France and Germany that Germany was supposed to stay out of, but again, violating the Treaty of Versailles. And wait for it, nobody does anything. In 1936, the Rome-Berlin Axis is basically a treaty or an alliance that is signed between Mussolini and Hitler that created an alliance out of the countries of Italy and Germany. Now, any sensible person might see what is coming, but remember, World War I was so devastating. Europe wanted to avoid another war. The word for giving into an aggressor's demands to give them what they want is called appeasement. Appeasement is one of the biggest reasons Hitler was able to become so powerful. In the late 1930s there, in 38 and 39, in Spain, there's going to be a civil war where they help Francisco Franco take control. He is going to rule Spain from that time because he's going to win the civil war all the way until his death in 1975. It was basically a chance for Mussolini and Hitler to test out their rebuilt militaries, test their new policy of blitzkrieg or lightning war, and is going to get them ready for the start of World War II. So in 1938, Hitler annexes Austria, takes over the country of Austria, includes it into the German Empire, and again, nobody does anything. Some of the people of Austria even welcome, as they see themselves as German and are happy to be considered part of Germany now. So some people are even happy and accepting of that. In 1939, Hitler annexes or takes over the Sudetenland and then all of Czechoslovakia for Lebensraum, which just means living space. He said the reason he needs to take it over is the Germans need a living space. And he told the rest of Europe, he's like, listen, I know I've been taking over these places. This is the last of what I want. And you can see how Germany is growing up there on the map above. He signs with other Western nations the Munich Agreement, which basically gives him permission to do this. So they basically tell Hitler, okay, Hitler, we'll give you this land, but you promise to stop? Hitler says yes. So they keep appeasing him, and I'm going to use that word because that word's important. So giving into his demands and allowing him to rebuild the military, take over land, create defensive positions, and the Munich Agreement allowed that to be okay. Great example of appeasement. Also in 1939, busy year, Hitler is going to sign the Nazi and Soviet Pact. He's basically going to go to Joseph Stalin in the USSR, Soviet Union, and basically it's just, hey, we promise not to attack you if you promise not to attack us. Stalin did not want a war with Germany, so he signs it. They even agree, and he lets Stalin in on his plan that he plans on taking over Poland, and he promises Russia land in Poland, like on the eastern side, if they help him take it over and they'll split up the land and everything is great. So him and Stalin have that agreement before the war starts. And then in 1939, we're going to talk about how the actual war breaks out. But all of the things you see there are the timeline of the 1930s where no one does anything to stop Hitler. Hitler could have been stopped, crushed at any point in time in the early 1930s as he violated the Treaty of Versailles, but instead, the rest of the world is going to appease him or just let him have what he wants to avoid the conflict. And the major reason is because after World War I and how terrible it was, the idea of war was super unpopular. So, World War I, the Axis powers against the Allied powers. The Axis powers were Germany, Russia, Italy, and Japan. Against the United States, Russia, England, France, and Italy. Now, wait a minute. There's something wrong with this. You see Russia up there twice, and you see Italy up there twice. As I just said, Hitler, before the war started, signed a non-aggression pact with Stalin. He is going to violate that and end up invading Russia, which then puts Russia over on the Allied side. Mussolini and Hitler are friends. We talked about the Rome access, the Rome-Berlin Axis, which created the alliance between the two countries. But Mussolini is going to get overthrown during that war. He's going to lose a lot of support, and half of Italy is going to start to support the Allies in the second side of the war because of how bad things are going for Italy in the war. So it's a little confusing, but hopefully that makes sense. The United States is going to not join until 1941. So just like World War I, the United States does not join the war when it first breaks out. They were practicing neutrality or isolation, trying to stay out of Europeans' wars, though they were probably aiding the Allies with military and financial aid. And other countries are going to be involved in this, but these are really the major players that you need to know. I feel like a question might come up. We haven't really talked about Japan since the Russo-Japanese War. Why is that coming up? Remember, Japan in the Meiji Restoration was modernized, industrialized, and so forth, and they needed land. They needed land because Japan doesn't have a lot of natural resources, meaning if they really want to do continue industrialization, they needed to take over places in Korea and Vietnam and China where they could get these natural resources. So they're going to use World War II and ally with Hitler and Mussolini and as a way to do that. So the main causes, the Treaty of Versailles. And I've already said this, it punished Germany way too severely. The terrible economic conditions that arose allowed someone like Hitler to become popular among the people and take over. So some people say it was guaranteed a World War II was going to happen the minute the Treaty of Versailles was signed. Appeasement. As I said, Hitler could have been stopped long before he was in the 1930s, but Western Europe, Britain, France, and if you want to blame the United States and other countries, you can as well, for just letting him violate the Treaty of Versailles because they didn't want to go to conflict. In the non-aggression pact with Russia, Russia and Germany agreed not to attack each other. I told you that Hitler is going to end up violating this and attacking Russia. The reason he's doing this is because he wanted their natural resources to help fund his war effort, and then that's going to switch Russia over to the Allied side. So just like there was the main causes of World War I, militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism, I told you the spark or the immediate cause of the war was when Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated from Austria. Just like World War I, World War II has long-term causes, and then that immediate spark or that thing that is going to actually start the war. So the Treaty of Versailles, appeasement, and the non-aggression pact with Russia are all longer-term causes of the war, but when Germany invades Poland is when the war really begins. As soon as Germany invades Poland, Great Britain and France declare war on Germany, and World War II begins. So we talked about Hitler's actions and the steps that are going to look on the international stage with him taking over countries, but let's look at some of Hitler's policies in his own country. The first policy that we're going to look at are the Nuremberg Laws. The Nuremberg Laws are basically anti-Semitic laws. Remember, anti-Semitic is basically against the Jewish faith, the Jewish people, that banned all Jews from relationships with non-Jews. It boycotted Jewish businesses. The Jews had to wear the Star of David to identify themselves so people would know if you were Jewish in public. Stores had the Jewish star painted on the outside of them and so forth if they were Jewish. Many Jewish people are going to lose their businesses, all types of income, because people are going to refuse to shop at these stores because of how Hitler portrayed them in the media and basically blame them for all of Germany's problems. They were the scapegoat. The scapegoat is someone you blame the problems on. And Hitler used the Jews. Anti Semitism was high. They were a minority in the country and they were an easy target. The SS were Hitler's secret police that we talked about. And Hitler had a youth program that you're going to read a little about. It was basically just kind of a Hitler's propaganda slash brainwash program to train boys into loyal German soldiers, nationalism loyal to Hitler. Think about it. As a teacher, I'm not saying you trust me with your life or anything like that. I hope you feel comfortable doing that. But what I'm saying is if you hear something from kindergarten through 12th grade from all of your teachers and people that you trust and people, that you have a little bit of respect for, you're going to believe it. So by indoctrinating Hitler's youth program, it basically ensured that people, as they were growing up in Germany, would be loyal to the German state, kind of blinded by nationalism, and therefore also anti-Semitic, which is why people grew up feeling this way, which is why it was easy for Hitler to accomplish these terrible things, eventually taking them out of their homes, forcing them to go live in these walled ghettos or communities that didn't have enough food, where people would starve to death on the inside before finally opening up concentration camps as the final solution, or what he saw as the final solution to for what Europe should do with the Jewish population. And also, as all totalitarian leaders do, propaganda. Hitler used images, posters, speeches, and movies to convince people he was the best leader for Germany and that Jews and other people that weren't true Germans were the problem. Blitzkrieg, if you've heard of it before, translates into lightning war and is going to be Germany's war plan for World War II. Basically, it's a military tactic. I'm sorry, that word spelled wrong. Military tactic created by the Germans, where they would first airstrike a territory for a long time and weaken its defenses. They would bring in tanks that would roll through and take out any defenses that were left, and then finally bring in foot soldiers afterward to sweep up whatever was left. It was a very successful tactic, allowed them to conquer areas very quickly. And relatively easily, because by the time the soldiers would roll through, they would find towns abandoned and so forth. So war begins. We said September 1st, 1939 is the official start of the war because Hitler invades Poland. As soon as he does this, Britain and France declare war on Germany. Germany is then going to attack Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and France. They're going to use a version of the Schlieffen Plan, attacking France through Belgium as they did in World War I. The battle or retreat of Dunkirk, France is going to fall very quickly. Britain had sent its soldiers to France to fight and help them fight it off, but they failed. The Battle of Dunkirk was basically the Allies were under siege by the German troops, and they were able to hold off long enough to get massive amounts of French and British soldiers across the English Channel back to England to save to kind of fight another day. I believe over 60,000 people are going to die in this battle. So you say that many people died. Can you call it a successful retreat? But it did save hundreds of thousands of soldiers' lives and allow them to live to fight another day. After France was taken over, they had something called the Vichy government that was set up. France is occupied, so they're no longer in the war. There are still people in the country that are fighting back against it secretly so they don't get caught, that type of thing. Charles de Gaulle, the future French president, is going to play a role in that. But the Vichy government is like the puppet government that Germany sets up in France for the remainder of the war. It's a dictatorship. The Luftwaffe, if you hear it, is the German Air Force, who were very powerful and led those Blitzkrieg strikes. And because Hitler knew it would take a lot of troops to actually, a lot of troops of his to die to actually get into Britain, the Battle of Britain is going to be air raids all of the time, night and day. Germany dropping bombs onto England and England trying to defend itself. as the last major European country to not fall, so that German Empire expanded.